time? Sure. Just like if I have to.
What? Oh, no, we're good.
Need anything from us?
No, I think we're good. It's good. Yeah, it's good. I just need to know if we're okay from Bill to get started.
Just do the 1 minute.
Yeah. 1 minute? Can you ask Bill if we're good? Okay. To get started. All right. Can you hear me? No? Bill? For this? Okay. So just, I can just use project. Okay.
For your audience here, but we are using the microphone for the broadcast.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Bill.
Right, that area.
All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm Michelle Mears, the Director of Planning and Community Development for the City of Somersworth. We have a great turnout this evening for this event. So thank you all for coming. There's about 48 people registered. So we're really excited to have you here. This workshop is a part of a year-long project to engage the Somersworth community in understanding our housing needs, creating a plan for action, and identifying regulatory barriers to implementing that plan. This project was funded by Invest New Hampshire Housing Opportunities Program grant and will wrap up in July 2024. I would like to thank the city manager for attending this, Robert Belmore, city staff, Anna Stockman and Dana Crosley, also Regional Planning Commission, Stratford Regional Planning Commission, Jen, and the Housing Steering Committee. If you guys could just raise your hand, the people that are on the Housing Steering Committee, as well as the elected officials, land use boards, and the residents. Our goal this evening is to set the stage for a healthy discussion about finding ways to increase opportunities for developing and even renovating affordable, accessible housing for all. We are accomplishing this tonight through infographics, sheets you received at registration. So you all should have received that when you registered. The keynote speakers you will hear from tonight and the 4 panelists who will follow. That will be the foundation we are setting, which will help us to have a healthy and productive conversation to inform decisions about how to find appropriate locations, build support, and construct housing for all members of the community, for Somersworth today and for in the future. We hope you will continue to stay involved after this workshop. We have your email address, so we will email you updates of what is happening. The webpage for our project is available on the city webpage at the bottom of your agenda as well. And you can also follow our progress on the city's social media site. And thanks again for attending.
Welcome. My name is Angela Cleveland. I am a principal planner for the Stratford Regional Planning Commission, and it is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker tonight. Nick Taylor is the executive director for the Seacoast. The Seacoast Coalition for Workforce Housing, and he will actually be our second keynote speaker, but he's in the first part of my agenda. And then Jen Sidz, who is the executive director for where I am honored to work at the Stratford Regional Planning Commission. So I'm going to ask Jen to come up first.
All righty. Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Michelle. Oh, hey, tonight's agenda, our speakers. Okay, so the team here asked me to not go faster than that through my slides. Asked me to give you an overview of some of the information and demographics that are shaping the housing market here in Somersworth. Stratford Regional Planning Commission, as one of 9 regional planning commissions in the state, has an obligation to periodically prepare a regional housing needs assessment. And the most recent one was just completed earlier this year. So we've pulled some highlights from that with a little focus on Somersworth to run through with you here this evening. So starting with our population. Across the region, our population has been growing, no surprise. And is projected to continue to do so. But if we zoom in on Somersworth itself, that trend, past history, has not been as steep of a growth rate as other communities in the region. But that projection is very similar to the region as a whole, and it's looking like it's going to taper off in the out years as we approach 2040 and 2050. Somersworth itself, 2020 population was just under 12,000, and by 2050 it's projected to be about 13,600. And part of why that population is tapering off in the out years is because our population is aging. And so naturally, as our population ages, our death rates increase. So that's part of what we see, and so that's part of why that population projection tapers off in the prior slide. But here we look at, we can see like the advancing of the baby boomers into the later sides of the bar chart, and there are a larger cohort out there, followed by a smaller Gen X population. Stratford County is also one of the youngest counties in the state. A lot of that is because of the impacts of UNH on that overall average age in the area. Somersworth, the median age in 2020 was 39.7, which is definitely lower than the state median of 43. And as we go through some of these things, think about how these trends impact housing choices. As we have older households, how do their housing demands differ from other populations? Related, household sizes. Average household sizes or median household sizes are declining, not just here in Somersworth, but everywhere. If we look at that, and we also look at the number of people in households, something that's a bit unique here in Somersworth is that the single person households were 31% of all households. Regionally, though, 16% are single person households. So that's another piece that's kind of driving this smaller average household size in Somersworth, where the average is just over 2.3 persons per household. So then we look at housing production. I think we all know that housing production has significantly declined over the last 2 decades. We see we had a peak in 2003. We all know what happened after that. We had a major economic recession, but then we never really recovered. And so these numbers on the left are the region as a whole, and on the right we've got the last 2 decades in Somersworth. Region as a whole, we had about a 50% decline from the 2000 to 2009 decade compared to the 2010 to 2020 decade. In Somersworth, it was almost a 75% decline. So when we start seeing fewer houses available, one of the natural impacts is the prices go up. And so we can see in the last 10 years, purchase prices in the region have doubled. Let's see, in 2012, the median purchase price of a home was $190,000, and in 2022, that was up to $370,000. Here in Somersworth, $350,000, so pretty close to that median across the region. I just like to point out that 1990 was $106,000, which is just crazy to think today. Similarly, on the rental side, rent prices have continued to climb. This is not a very optimistic presentation on some of this here, I'm sorry. So we've seen a 62% increase over the last decade in rental costs. The chart here shows 2-bedroom units. If we looked at all units available, the median rent in 2022 across the region was $1,572 compared to $970 in 2012. The median income needed to afford that rent in 2022 was $55,800, or the income needed, not the median income. The income needed to afford that median rent was $55,800. But the actual median was almost, well, $7,000, $8,000 less than that. So not nearly enough to afford that median rental unit. So you see that purple dot on the right, that's what the median renter household could actually afford compared to what was available. And I'll just note that the median income here in Somersworth is very similar to that of the region as a whole, with the exception that if you take and you look at Somersworth based on geography, to get wonky, there's 2 different census tracts in Somersworth. One of those, the median income is as low as $34,000. So there is a big difference. So another factor influencing our housing market and trends and demand is employment. Where people live, where people work. And while we did see that there was some decline in employment after COVID, those levels are returning right back to normal. We're hearing a lot about a labor shortage out there. So there is still increased demand for employees out there. When we look at where people live versus work, there are more people who live in our region and commute outside of the region than live here and work here. And that trend is probably going to continue. It's similar also for the city of Somersworth as well. Although with Somersworth, there's almost an equal number that commute into Somersworth that commute out. There's just slightly more that commute out. Another factor is net migration. So what is net migration? And here we say in-migration, but I'm going to point out that Somersworth is a little different than some of the other communities out there. So net migration is when we measure the population change, we know from point A to point B what the change is in births. We know what the change is in deaths. So if we see the dark blue, those are births. They see the maroon, those are deaths. So if you take and subtract your deaths from your births, you have your natural population change. So you can figure out what your natural population change is. And then the difference and what you have left over is your net migration. Except in Somersworth, it's negative. That means you've got more people moving out of Somersworth than moving into Somersworth. So in the last decade, there was a total population change of only 89 people. That is because when you take your births and then you subtract your deaths and you subtract how many people moved out, you're only left with 89 people. That's a difference in population change. All right, so one of the things we're seeing out there in the market is that housing isn't matching demand or local needs. And part of that we can see and measure based upon how many days housing units spend on the market for those that are for sale. And we've all heard the stories of how things are selling in a day, in 2 days. We don't have inventory. We know that. And similarly on the rental side. On the rental side, we're down to about 1% rental vacancy. That equates to somebody moves out, they've already got a new tenant, there's a couple days in between when the one moves out and the next one moves in. In a healthy rental market, we want to see about 5% vacancy rate. All right, and then when we compare the cost of those units, which we kind of touched on, to incomes and how much of a person's income goes towards their rental costs or their housing costs, we use 30% as a healthy measure. If you pay 30% of your income or less to your rental costs or your mortgage costs, you're doing great. If you pay more than 30%, then we say it's a housing cost burden. So we've got across the region about 35% of the households in the region that pay more than 30%. In Somersworth, it's 39%. And unsurprisingly, you can see, like if you look over here on the bar chart, green are the renters, green are the people that are housing cost burdened, and the dark blue, those are the folks that are not cost burdened. And so you can see there are more folks at the lower income spectrum, end of the spectrum that are housing cost burdened. unsurprisingly. All right, so looking at how that income compares to cost of housing, we know that it's really challenging to save, but if you can save, you look at the bottom line of the shaded area, that's your 20% down payment, you're doing all right. You might be able to purchase that median home, but otherwise it's a little bit more challenging. So if we look from 2013 to 22, renter incomes increased by 40%, but rents increased by 60% and purchase prices doubled. So really quick to compound that, interest rates. These are definitely from a year ago now. They haven't really changed much. But if you look at the end of 21 and compare to 22, the impact of interest rate alone, that interest rate change, has added just over $900 to a mortgage on the same purchase price home. So that's really has a significant impact on the amount of home someone can afford. All right, and then we also looked at occupations relative to what the average income is and what they can afford. And I think the short story here is that most professions don't earn enough for a single person with their own income to afford the median rent or the median purchase price. All right, so getting into the good stuff here. What do we need for housing units? Across the region, in our region, with 18 communities, we need just over 9,500 additional units to meet demand between now and 2040. About a third of those are projected to be renter occupied and 2/3 for sale. Looking here into Somersworth, similar proportions, 750 units from 2020 to 2040. And so if we look at how much we were building in the last 2 decades compared to what we need in the next 2 decades, the numbers aren't hugely different with the exception of 1 5-year period. And also when we look at the 2020 to 2025 section, that doesn't include anything that's been permitted between 2020 and today. So there could already be some progress towards that 254. So we took those numbers and we looked at what there is for land. And so when you look at this chart here, or this map here, and I think you'll see it in a little bit more detail in one of the breakout groups, the purple is the land that is zoned residential that is not constrained. And that means it doesn't have conservation land, it doesn't have wetlands, it's not already built on, there's no water, there's no steep slopes. But then when we take away those that don't have water and sewer, there's a little bit less out there to build on. So this isn't a lot of land available when we're trying to fit another 750 housing units over the next 20 years. And so one of the steps we did is we used some scenario modeling where we took and said, okay, based on current zoning, what can we put on the landscape? And by 2031, that shows we've saturated the landscape and we don't get to the 750. At 2031, I think we get to 530 units. So almost there, but not quite there. So I'm going to pass it to Nick and challenge you all to think, how do we create opportunities for housing in the community? We clearly can't based under the current framework. So if demand is 750, how do we get there? So, Nick, take it away.
Thank you, Jen, for all that incredible data and for all the work that SRPC does. You know, communities and us nonprofits couldn't do our work without the great data quality that you all present. So, as Angie mentioned at the beginning, I'm Nick Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Workforce Housing Coalition of the Greater Seacoast. We're a nonprofit in the region that works with communities in Stratford County, Rockingham County, through education, community engagement, and technical assistance when it comes to housing that's attainable to our workforce. And so first, I also want to thank you all for being here, for being part of this conversation. It's such an important conversation for us to have. And more power to you for being here, for being part of that solution here. So
Jen touched on a lot of the data. I'm going to sort of build on that a little bit with how do people feel about it and what can we do about it? And not with necessarily prescriptive solutions. There is no one solution, but as we continue this community visioning process today and onward, what are some things you could think about? What are some options to consider as you think about what the future of Somersworth looks like? So when we get to public opinion, how do people feel about the data that Jen presented? Are they really feeling it in their everyday lives? Is it something they want their communities to address? The answer is yes. University of New Hampshire did their Granite State poll where they asked residents, what's the most important problem facing New Hampshire? The most important problem that folks cited was housing. 27% of people, more than double the next highest cost of living, more than jobs in the economy, cited housing. Another 8% cited homelessness. So you combine sort of housing-related topics, that's 35% of people in New Hampshire said that is the most important problem in their entire life facing the state right now. St. Anselm College also did a poll this summer asking Granite Staters how they feel about housing. They asked a couple different questions. First one there, 78% of people responded saying that their community needs more affordable housing to be built. Not a single person under the age of 35 disagreed with that statement, and 80% of people 65 or older agreed with that statement. So this is something that's impacting everybody. It's also impacting certainly the entire age spectrum. Seniors who are trying to stay in their communities but potentially downsize, and young people who are starting to, where can they put down roots? How can they get that first job? If they get that first job, where are they going to live? 58% of voters said they want more affordable homes in their neighborhood. So not just somewhere else in the state, somewhere else in the town. They want it here. They are willing to put it in their own neighborhood because they see that as such a big problem. And they want to stay in their communities. They want vibrant communities. They want diverse communities that have a range of incomes that people can live in. 60% of New Hampshire voters think that towns and cities should change their zoning regulations to allow for more housing. So we even keep getting into this idea of what can communities do, what kind of public policy solutions are there. People are making that connection to say they want their communities to do something about this. And that's why you all are here. That's why so many great groups are out here to try and figure out what is that solution, because it's not easy, right? There is no one solution. So people see the challenges both in the public opinion side and in the data, right? But again, what can we do about it? The first way we like to introduce this kind of topic is, okay, well, what drives housing costs? If we're going to figure out what we can do about it, what are the different factors that we have to consider? We talk about it in the 5 L's. Labor, land, lending, lumber, and laws. So labor, some of these a community could impact with their policies. Some of them are out of their control, but important to figure out sort of what are all the pieces here. Labor, the workforce. How much does it cost to pay someone to help build your house, right? Folks know if you've tried to get something fixed in your own home, shortage of electricians, plumbers, contractors in general. So what is that workforce piece? Land. How much does land actually cost and how much is available, right? That absolutely goes into how much of housing costs, and right, how much does that land cost? Lending, access to financing, interest rates, construction loans. This is, again, something that absolutely plays into how much does a housing development need to either sell for or rent for when it's actually constructed. Lumber, we had to get that 5th L in, so it's lumber, but it's really all materials, right? It's your doors, your windows, your foundations, roofing, everything that goes into it. Material costs also up. And laws. This is your zoning. This is your local regulations. That is what communities have the most power over. We're really going to spend the next couple minutes talking about a little bit on land, but mostly on laws. Somersworth can't do too much about the national interest rates, right? But what we can do is figure out how do we zone for what we want to see in the community. So again, those are your policy levers. What kind of things can we look at? We're going to briefly touch on land and again then go into the laws piece here. So land, typically this is out of a community's control, right? The vast majority of land sales are private entity to private entity. The one exception is communities can take a look at what is city-owned land or town-owned land. What would you want to do with it? If you put out a request for proposal, what kind of things would you want to see? And there are ways there where you can use some creative methods to help incentivize what you do want to see on city-owned land. And part of getting that cost down could be figuring out how could you get favorable terms or a long-term lease or something where, you know, the community is getting creative to say, we own this land. We don't want to be a housing developer. We're not a housing developer, but what do we want to see in our community, and what could we do to bring some of the costs down by figuring out a way to be creative on the land cost. But again, the laws piece is really where we're going to focus. So this is, you know, local zoning laws and economic development incentives are, again, where communities can have the greatest impact. So what is a zoning ordinance? Essentially, it's laws that regulate the use and development of land. What can you build? What can someone do with it? What does that look like? All of that is built into zoning. You know, is it a commercially zoned area? Is it residentially zoned? Is it mixed use? How tall can you build? How many parking spaces are required on that land? Economic development incentives. These are policies that, you know, the state has granted to communities to be able to use to incentivize development in certain areas. This is the 79E Community Revitalization Tax Relief, TIF districts. You don't have to be an expert on any of this. There's a lot of people that are policy wonks. I would consider myself a policy wonk, but a lot of people are policy wonks. You don't need to necessarily know exactly how a TIF district works, right? But what we're trying to help you visualize here is that there are incentives that could say, hey, this geographic space is where we want development. This is where we want to see. What can we do to incentivize and make sure that that's where it goes? There are definitely place-based, geography-based incentives that a community could enact. So what does zoning look like in practice? Earlier this summer, there was the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas was first released. This is really the first visualization across the state about what does zoning look like in different communities. You know, you can't, a little too small to get really deep in there, but basically what this is saying is where can you build 5+ families, larger multifamily buildings. Where there's yellow and orange, that's where you can build it. We took this and we looked at Somersworth, Dover, Rochester. As you can see, most of the larger multifamily city center along those infrastructure corridors and sort of more higher traffic roads, again, where there's gateway, where there's likely infrastructure. So amongst the Tri-Cities, you know, fairly similar in terms of where larger development can occur. Also looked at two-family. This is duplexes. Again, Somersworth, Dover, Rochester, you can see there is some difference here, right? This is Dover and Rochester have more land that allows for duplexes. So as you think about what are some different ways that zoning impacts what gets built, this is a great way to look at that. Duplexes are generally more affordable for people. And it's sort of that gentle density that says, like, not every neighborhood, not every community should have a large multifamily in it. It may not fit infrastructurally, it may not fit in the context of the neighborhood, but are there areas where you could allow for some of that gentle density, ADUs, duplexes, things like that? And so when you're looking at this, this is a good way to visualize what does some of the zoning code look like in practice. As we keep going, the good news, and the rest of it tonight, and as you're giving feedback throughout this whole process, you don't have to be a zoning expert. There are a lot of really smart people much smarter than I, who are going to work on that. You got Michelle, you got a whole team here that'll do a fantastic job. The idea is, what would you might want to see? What is that visualization about what the future of Somersworth could be, what you might want to see in your community? And then other people can work to sort of work out the specifics about how that happens. The next couple slides here, before we get into our broader panel discussion, are from the New Hampshire Housing Toolbox. This is something that the New Hampshire Office of Planning and Development put together. They're a statewide department as part of the Department of Business and Economic Affairs. They put together a toolkit with some different ideas for what communities can do. So we're going to run through these pretty quick. Again, you don't need to know every single one of them, but these are type of things that, as you visualize, as you think about what might be possible, worth considering. So on the left there, you have your missing middle housing types. These are things that are not your larger apartment buildings, everything between a large apartment building and a single family home. So duplexes, triplexes, little cottages, townhomes, things that do fit into more of that gentle density category. Accessory dwelling units. These are commonly talked about as in-law apartments, right? Every community allows for attached ADUs, could allow for detached. Dover allows for 2 ADUs. There are different ways in terms of parking requirements or permitting or different things that you can do for a community to incentivize accessory dwelling units to come in. A couple other examples, mixed use development. This is where there's commercial on the first floor, residential on the second floor. Are there areas that are zoned only commercial that could be changed to mixed use so that there could be housing on a second floor? It keeps people, especially in a downtown, there throughout the day. People are working there, people are also living there, keeps people in really great sort of economic development tool in terms of driving value. Infill development, as you can see top to bottom, this is an area where there was development in a space, but they had some larger underutilized parking lots. In this example, that was allowed to be developed a little bit denser, basically saying, hey, maybe we don't need that huge parking lot that's not almost never full, and we can put some mixed use or put some housing, do other things where you're not spreading out, you're not creating sprawl, you're saying we have areas that we just want to be a little bit denser to be able to reach those targets without, again, spreading too far out into our communities. A couple other examples here, really quick, cluster housing. This is another sort of great example of, hey, how do we build a little bit more dense, but not sort of spread everything out and create a ton of sprawl, right? So you have an example where, hey, maybe that's a 20-acre parcel. You could either build 10 homes, 2 acres each, or you could build 12 homes on maybe an eighth of an acre, and you save that open space for public use, for walking trails, hiking trails, things like that. And then this other one on the right, adaptive reuse. We see a lot of this in New Hampshire, especially these old mill buildings, but this can be something that occurs in old schools that we don't have a use for anymore, or older office buildings as people work from home, right? This idea of taking older commercial areas, reusing them into mixed use or housing to sort of make the most of the space that we've got. So if I can leave you with one thing here, there's no one solution to this. There's no magic formula that says if you pass this, we will solve the housing challenges that we face. But what's important is for communities, for you all to develop a vision about what you want to see and then enact the policies that make that possible. So if there are things there, as you have your discussions that you really like, that you say, that would fit really well here. I would love to live in that. My neighbors, my father, my mother would love to live in something like that. You could develop that vision and then enact some really great policies to make it possible. And that's how we'll get out of this. We'll get out of this working together and working on a common vision. So thank you again for all being here. Really looking forward to, there's our contact information, our website. Always feel free to reach out to us. But really looking forward to the continued discussion here the rest of the evening.
We're going to move into our panel discussion, which includes 4 panelists. So I'd like them all to come up. I welcome them up here. First is Jen. She needs no introduction because she's been up here already. And Nick, who also was here. But then we're also welcomed by Michelle, who kicked us off this evening. And Tori Jennison, who is the Population Health Systems Chief for Stratford County. So when we were designing this panel, we thought about doing this a little bit differently, and this was thanks to an awesome conversation that I had with Tori about a month ago. How do we both set the stage and provide some education while also making this fun? Because sometimes panels, you've probably seen some panels that are snoozers. So we wanted to make this fun. We called this myth busting. And so I'm going to create a myth situation that we've probably all heard and ask one of our panelists, and actually if anyone would like to follow up on that, as a reminder, please do, but a myth situation that they're going to respond to with what the truth is about housing, about affordable housing, about the types of housing that Nick was talking about some of the scenarios and the information that Jen presented in her presentation. So for no further ado, I'm going to start with Nick. So Nick, affordable low-income and workforce housing, it's all the same.
This is the definitions question, right? It's one we get all the time. And before I get into it, I do think it's important to realize that as Jen showed in the data pieces, we do need all sorts of housing for all different income levels, right? There is no one group that is really sort of satisfied right now, right? There is now supply on the market, whether it's rental, whether it's for purchase. People can't find a home regardless of the income level. But this sort of question of, okay, well, you say affordable housing, you say workforce housing, what does it actually mean, right? The vast majority of the time people are talking about affordable housing, they're really talking about lowercase a affordable housing. Affordable in the sense of you're not spending, as HUD defines it, more than 30% of your income, your gross income on your gross housing costs, right? So when you're talking about affordable, oftentimes it's that lowercase a, people use it interchangeably where they're saying everything's affordable to somebody, it's not affordable to me, right? But sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're talking about very specific policies. So oftentimes when you're seeing capital A affordable housing, you're talking about something that's no more than 30% of gross income for someone making 30% of the area median income. So it's very sort of folks that are on that bottom third, really lower than the bottom third, right? 30% of the area median income, heavily subsidized often, and it's certainly an area of the market where it's really underbuilt and a huge need that we're seeing across the state. Workforce housing, this is actually in state statute, in state law. It is something that is rented at a rate of 60% of the area median income if it's rental, or sold at something that's 100% of the area median income. So this gets confusing with us. We're the Workforce Housing Coalition. The workforce housing law in New Hampshire is actually only about 10 years old. So we are 20 years old. So we do work on housing that is not just workforce housing, but again, it is defined in state statute as what those metrics are. And a couple other things to think about is, when something is rented, what are those income verifications? Making sure that it does get to, if you're building workforce housing or capital A affordable housing, making sure there are those income verifications so it really is going to the people that need it the most, that really can't find anywhere else to live right now. So that's all to say that it's important to know the terms and to realize what people are talking about so you're not talking over each other's head. But at the end of the day, there is such a great need out there that is things that are attainable for young families, for young workers, for seniors looking to downsize and stay in their community, that we really do need things that fit the whole market and across the board. And so I think as folks are thinking about what they want to see and those different housing solutions, it's going to be something that fits across the board.
Anybody want to follow up with that? Well, you just said something that I thought was a great lead into Michelle's myth, which is, Michelle, we have enough housing for everyone in Somersworth. We don't need any more.
So, Somersworth is very fortunate. We are one of the densest regions densest areas in our downtown. Somersworth single-family residential housing stock represents 46% of all homes, with a total of 2,389 units of properties, and the second largest is multifamily with 3 or more, with a total of 519 units. But as you saw in the slides that Jen presented, we have a very low vacancy rate of 0%, so there are some gaps as far as multifamily and rental units in the city of Somersworth. Last year, for building permits, there were 44 newly completed residential structures, single family, it was 20 housing units, manufactured homes, which are typically replacements of existing or older manufactured homes, 13 units, so that wasn't actually adding any more units of housing. Townhouse units, a total of 8, multifamily buildings, a total of 3, so we added a total of 44 new units, and we have 5 currently accessory dwelling units within the city, so that might be an opportunity for some new housing.
Great point. And that goes to the next slide on the ADUs, which are an important feature and something we want to continue talking about. So as we continue this conversation, you'll see some threads, and some of this is creating a baseline and a foundation for our discussions in the breakout groups. So hopefully this will help you to have those big discussions. So Jen, our next myth would be that Somersworth doesn't need more apartments, single family units are what's needed.
So I think one of the things Nick said earlier in his presentation is there's no one size fits all. What I'm looking for a housing unit is not necessarily what my college graduate son is looking for a housing unit. And so similarly throughout the community, everyone is looking for something a little different. That's going to be predicated based on their income. It's going to be driven by how old they are. It's going to be driven by physical ability, whether they want something that's a single story or multi-stories. So I think there's, it comes back to that. There's no one size fits all. And so I don't know. And then kind of piggybacking on Michelle and her comment, we know that the population is still going to grow, and we know that the labor market is still going to grow, and so we need somewhere for people to live. And then, I would challenge to say, if we look at how do we reduce the impacts to our undeveloped areas, the one way to do that is to look at multifamily, is to look at infill within the denser areas of the community, because that helps to give us a balance. If we can concentrate and do multifamily in certain areas, that leaves other areas of the community untouched, and so helps create, again, more balance that I think we all look to achieve within our communities.
Great. So Jen, can you, do you have a definition for ADU by any chance?
Oh,
just curious, because
yes,
I don't think.
Yeah. So we were talking.
We talked about it, but.
So adding into that language of what could be multifamily, there's multiple ways to achieve multifamily housing. It could be apartments, it could be townhouses, but it could also be accessory dwelling units. And an accessory dwelling unit is essentially when you take your home and you carve off a small part of your home for like an in-law apartment, and it's accessory to your house. It's not the primary part of what's happening on your property, but it's something that supplements it. And so one of the nice things about accessory dwelling units is they can be temporary. They can be easily absorbed back into the primary structure there. And so it allows for, if you think about, we were talking about the baby boomer bubble, or there's also a Gen Z bubble. So those are the, two levels or two cohorts within our population that might be looking for something a little bit smaller. And so it gives an opportunity for those bubbles to have a housing option that's smaller, that's more affordable, without having to worry about who's going to occupy them when that generation kind of vacates those units.
All right, so we did a survey back in July and asked for things that people were concerned about, and homelessness did come up in that survey. And so this next myth goes to Tori, and she actually has some slides for this. So Tori, people choose to be homeless. People that are homeless are lazy and/or addicts. Shelters and supportive housing drops neighborhood housing values.
So that's like 100 myths in one statement, and I'm going to try to fly through them all. I'm going to stand up because I look more trustworthy when I'm standing, and since I'm busting this myth, I want to do that if that's okay with you. My name is Tori. You'll see that my mind is going, so if you can help me remember. I'm a population health doc. I work with Stratford County and a bunch of other communities in New Hampshire and other parts of the world, but grew up in Barrington, and this is home. So I really appreciate the invitation to be here tonight. How many people in here are older than 37? Thank you. Congratulations. You heard Jen say you're above average. You're above average. If you're older than 37, you're above average. So it is my privilege to be here tonight with all of you above average folks. If you're between 37 and 42, then you should move to Dover, because then you'll be above average there too. So big myth. We see it more and more now. We see it more and more in social media. We see it in family conversations around the table, right? People are homeless because they want to be. People are homeless because they are lazy, or they're addicts, or they have some other fill in the character flaw that you think is a character flaw, or the person who is holding this belief thinks is a character flaw. The reality is there are two big causes of homelessness. They're not going to shock anybody: poverty and system failure. And those might not even be technically two separate things. Healthcare system, criminal justice system, mental health system, education system. Every word that you can put system after has areas where it doesn't serve folks. When it doesn't serve everyone to the same successful level, that's a system failure. When you have folks with certain childhood experiences where they have traumatic growing up experiences, and that's a whole nother conversation that I'd love to see you all come back for, that puts them at risk of being even more impacted by a system failure. You have a crappy teacher in middle school. You decide you don't like school. That crappy teacher might have a spouse at home who has pancreatic cancer, or has a child that's going through their own difficulty. But there is no system in place to support that teacher enough to make sure that that kiddo doesn't decide they don't like school and just don't want to finish. So now you've got a kiddo who doesn't finish high school. Their job prospects are immediately affected negatively, right? Who's going to tell a 9-year-old that they have a character flaw that means they deserve to be homeless? I don't think that's where we're going. I don't think that's what folks think about if they really stop to think about it. What percentage of the population is homeless on average? Just toss a guess out, and if you're wrong, I won't point and laugh. 0.2? Did I hear 0.2? Okay, I heard 30. What else we got? 5? Anybody else? 10? Just feel like Price is Right yet? So 10's closest. About 12% of the population in any given year, in any given community, and remember this is average, their chances are there are communities you'll say nobody's homeless, and you'd be wrong. You'd be wrong, but there are some that are this many and some that are a lot more than the average. That's how math works. So about 12%. In New Hampshire, that means about 139,000 people a year are homeless. That's a lot of people. You know how many shelter beds we have in the state of New Hampshire? 700. 700. And some of those are reserved for families, and some of those are reserved for domestic violence survivors that tend to be oriented towards people who identify as female. So it's another whole, we're going to have a whole series of these conversations. I'm so excited. The biggest portion of the population that's homeless, single men. The biggest percentage of shelter beds, not for single men. We're back here. So these are all, we have pretty good data across the country about what does contribute to homelessness. Loss of a job, addiction, which is sometimes the result of a loss of a job, or of relationship violence, or of being incarcerated. Or these are both antecedents and outcomes. They influence homelessness, they result from homelessness. Oh my God, that sounds like a cycle. The things that people end up in homelessness from are also the things that make it hardest to get out of it. But none of these things are being lazy, right? None of them are being lazy as a term. So we have 139,000 people, according to the data in New Hampshire, that are homeless every year. In 2021, we count them. Every year we count them. Folks heard of the point-in-time count? It happens in January, which is really a great time to count people who live outside in New Hampshire. January. Brilliant. System failure. System failure. Nobody sees a problem counting people who live outside in the middle of January in New Hampshire. Yeah, system failure. We counted almost 4,700 people in 2021. That's a little bit of a wonky year because COVID, but this was actually about 2 weeks before COVID. We know that even the 12% is an undercount. That's 139,000 people. We counted less than 5. We use this count at the state level and at local levels to decide how much money we put towards things and how we make decisions. If I budgeted for 5,000 of anything and really needed to attend to 137,000, I have a problem. I have a system failure. I have an overwhelming inability to serve the people that need to be served. But we keep talking about the big cause of homelessness as being the people want to be homeless. It's not. It's not. Yep. No, you can go next. She's so excited, she wants me to move along. So the short answer to that myth question, homeless people don't choose to be homeless. It's not a reasonable assumption. They sometimes choose to live outside instead of housing options that they don't find acceptable. That's a different conversation. But then we say, why don't you find those housing options acceptable? If it's congregate shelter, and we've got amazing partners at Crossroads House. People sometimes say, I don't want to go to Crossroads House. The last time I was in a shelter, I was beaten up. I was sexually assaulted. I was, fill in the blank. So folks need to have some choices. We're not advocating for them to have choices that aren't available to average citizens. We're saying we need to talk about what choices can they have within our ability to provide reasonable accommodation. So the second myth.
Around property values.
Property values, that's a big one, right?
Creating these places.
Right.
As the 139,000.
Right.
That we estimate.
Not in my backyard, NIMBY, not in my backyard. City of Portsmouth, they had this argument over a treehouse. A kid's treehouse, neighbors said, I can see it, they can see me, I don't want it. If a community can't have a civil conversation about a treehouse in a backyard, it's probably not going to be terribly successful having a conversation about shelters and supportive housing. What's the difference? Shelters are places where folks go just to be in from the elements. The term is really, we have more definitions, 100 different definitions, and none of them really matter. Supportive housing is when you add extra staff to help folks who are coming in from the elements to navigate those system failures so that they can find more permanent housing and stay in it. That's acceptable, that's affordable, anything that any of us want for ourselves and our families. So we often hear that you put a shelter or supportive housing in my neighborhood, it's going to bring my property values down. Not true. 2016, the Association of Realtors, the National Association of Realtors, did a study in 100 of the biggest metropolitan cities in the US. They did not look at smaller communities like any of the ones in Stratford County because properties just don't change. The prices don't change that much. Then they found that in lower income neighborhoods, shelters raise property values. Lots of reasons, right? Workforce. They add to the tax base. A lot of reasons. That's our fourth conversation that we can have in the future. In higher income neighborhoods, they did see that sometimes they did have a negative 2 to 3% impact. Can you choke on a negative 2 to 3% impact if you're in a higher income neighborhood? If you're in a low income neighborhood and your house appreciated by 200%, you're going to cry about it? You know, that's what happened for most of us. If we own a home, our house is appreciated by 100%, 200%, and that's a different conversation. Difference between property values appreciating and property values value. Value is here and now. Property appreciation is what happens to the value over time, right? Hospital will decrease your property value if it's in your town, in your neighborhood. A shooting range, a power plant. These are successively higher impacts. A funeral home. Sorry, Somersworth, you got a net migration negative. You got might have a problem with funeral homes. A cemetery, a strip club, that doesn't surprise anybody. Bad schools will drop your property values by over 20%, according to that study. Bad schools. So when we look at this last myth that says homeless services bring people to the area for the services because they come from all over the place where there aren't services. Who's heard that one? If you build it, they will come. I want to ask you if you believe it, because hopefully you will say no, not so much in a minute. And this one I'm going to walk a little bit. So this is Somersworth. You've seen, do you know that this is what Somersworth looked like from the air or from PowerPoint or Photoshop before tonight? Probably you didn't. It's a lovely, very neatly packaged community. The red stuff up here is the desirability. This map over here, the animation, I didn't want to blow up the internet, so this did have animation and it doesn't now, so you'll have to use your imaginations. Desirability, right here. The red areas, less desirable of Somersworth. Trust me when I say underneath, it's a little more desirable. Over here, owners versus renters. The more renter-occupied spaces, the less desirable. Not terribly shocking, right? Because as we just saw, folks who are renting are really struggling to have any leftover income. They're not necessarily a valuable population because stuff is so expensive. Oh, there you go. So thank you. Let's go to the last one. So this is what's really interesting when you try to package it all together. Household income. Less desirable area, lower income. Mostly renter occupied, not all low income. So you've got some renters who have higher income, but they aren't able to move within Somersworth because of the way the housing stock is kind of oddly distributed. You have some opportunity to inform that conversation. One of the things we can do, protect housing for these folks. For these folks who are renting, for these folks who are homeowners in these areas, protect housing. When you come together as a community to look at the different policies around what do we do, that's one of the recommendations. You know, to prevent homelessness, you have to literally prevent homelessness. We're not just trying to solve it by working with folks who are already homeless. Let's prevent homelessness before folks become homeless. It's a lot cheaper, it's a lot quicker, and those folks tend to become your folks who invest in your community and eventually end up in homeowners and in your desirable areas. So some of the other suggestions in that, what do you do? When we talk about what keeps your property values high so that these folks can continue to live here, continue to have a strong welfare department. You've got a great welfare department. You've got a great city administration. Continue to invest in your schools. Bad schools, 20% depreciation in your property value, right off the top. And continue to have these conversations and participate in them. So for folks that are under 37, you're pretty cool too. I don't want you to feel badly, but it's great to see this community start this conversation, and I'm happy to continue to have this conversation with anybody that wants kind of the references, more data, any other resources that we can provide. And the slide deck does have the references in there as well. Thank you.
Right, you mentioned school children, and so Jen, our next question is around, our next myth is multifamily housing developments bring new school-age children.
Wrong. The opposite. So it's a little outdated now. 2005, New Hampshire Housing did a study that looked at household formation, household sizes, and the number of children present, and they looked at and tried to correlate it to different factors. The number one contributing factor to determining if there are going to be children in a house or an apartment, bedrooms. Not whether it's rental or owner occupied, but bedrooms. You have a house with 4 bedrooms, you have more room for kids. You have a house with 2 bedrooms, not so much room for kids. And so that is the number one driving force behind kids in housing units. I will note that, that the housing study is a bit outdated, 2005. New Hampshire Housing is about to release an updated study. It is highly unlikely that that big picture finding will change. What might change is just the detailed numbers themselves. That's coming out soon, and I know they're previewing it at their big conference that's coming up on October 4th. So stay tuned for even more details on that number.
Yes, stay tuned.
Can we talk quickly about homeless kids?
Yeah.
If we're going
and-
to talk about kids?
And
Yeah.
Michelle, if you wanted to add anything about school, like our school situation right now, that's actually, we're in need of additional. So both of you, please add to that.
You don't have enough. I'll go. I cheated and I pulled the numbers on school enrollment
Sorry, Michelle.
beforehand. Sorry. No, I just steal Michelle's.
So, we do have we had a couple of multifamily projects come through planning board. One of the requirements at the planning board level is to look at school enrollment. We have found from the data that the multifamily, for example, the Canal Street Mill only brings in 5 additional students. So that's
Wow.
just something to think about.
From how many units? Sorry, was in that?
I don't know, that was 128 units, so.
Wow, and only
that
5
was a
new
large
kids.
Family project. The Sunningdale subdivision, there's only a handful of kids that live out in that subdivision, so that's just something to think about.
Yeah, and somewhere in my folder, I have the actual enrollment numbers, but over the last 10 years, enrollment is down 25% in Somersworth, just pulling the September enrollments for the last 10 years.
And they flex. So current enrollment that was reported in September, again, evidence that your school district is on the ball because it's still September and that data is already available, looked like, can't read my own writing. They've already provided it. So Somersworth told us 1,300, sound right? 1,332? Does that
Sounds
sound
about right.
Yeah. So not a lot of kids, compared to of the 3 cities. Dover and Rochester both have probably twice the population, not quite twice the number of children. Is that difference significant? No, not when we're talking about these decisions. How many kids in the school are homeless? As we collect that data. Anybody have guesses? I'll shut my eyes, I won't even see who guesses. 2%, very close. So the range in Somersworth that's been reported since it's been reported a lot longer, but I only looked at 2018 on, ranges between 2.5% to slightly less than 5%. Did you know you had homeless kids in the schools in Somersworth? You got a lot. You got 75, give or take, any given year. So and kids under 9 are the highest growing percentage of the homeless population, kids under 9. So and there are no 9-year-olds that are homeless by themselves on the street. They don't get counted in that number. So homeless kids come with homeless parents as well. So those families are there and they work really hard to stay in school. What are the systems issues that help them do that? Is definitely worth including in the conversations that you're having here as well. What sort of supports do those kids need? What do they get? Again, you've got a strong school system, you've got a great welfare department, you've got an attentive city manager's office, and your city council is engaged and knowledgeable. So all of those things are positives and probably part of the reason why you're having this conversation now, and I encourage you to stay involved with it.
Appreciate that. All right, Michelle, Somersworth your existing housing stock is in poor condition. There are so many rundown properties.
So this is something that came out of the housing survey. We had over 300 people answer our housing survey this summer, that we have rundown properties in the city. Jen went over the median purchase price of housing. I think it was $424,000 for the median purchase price. I wouldn't say that's a rundown. How much?
$350,000.
$350,000, sorry. But how old was that data?
A year ago.
A year ago, so it's probably higher now.
Definitely.
So we have also, we have a very active code compliance office. We have adopted the property maintenance code, and we have a very active code compliance officer. Some of the code compliance issues he's dealing with are in certain neighborhoods in the city, but he's addressing those. I think he sent out close to 100 courtesy notices or notices of violation to property owners on code compliance issues. So the city is fortunate that we have somebody that's looking at those issues, and some of the deficiencies, our biggest deficiency is illegal dumping of trash, or mattresses. That's one of the biggest deficiencies.
Thank you. Well, at this point, we want to open it up to the audience to ask some questions. So if you raise your hand, I can bring the mic over again so that we can capture that. And we see one from Bonnie.
Okay, I can speak loud. So Michelle, this question's for you. Just to speak to the question on the rundown properties in Somersworth, because it's something I hear about a lot as a citizen. And I know that there's a lot of question about growing the Main Street area. I know you probably hear about it all the time. We love Main Street. We want it to grow, and we want the downtown area to grow. What are we doing about the properties on Main Street and Green Street and some of those rundown areas where, is there anything we can do from a city standpoint to make those areas nicer so businesses will come in and use those properties and occupy them? I'm hearing things like it's the owner situation or, stuff like that. Like there are a lot of empty storefronts that really could be, Main Street could be gorgeous and downtown could be great, and we could really be flourishing as a city with new businesses. And from a chamber standpoint, it's what we need. But we have an undesirable Main Street right now. And what are we doing to kind of push that forward?
So I would actually argue that the city has put a lot of investment into their Main Street, including getting a grant for sidewalk infrastructure and utility infrastructure.
Sidewalks are great.
Yeah.
My street is amazing, by the way.
So the city has been working on adopting ordinance, for example, the outdoor dining ordinance, to make that more livable and a walkable community. We got a transportation enhancement grant back in 2014. I think it was $4 million to improve our sidewalks and update utilities and add landscaping improvements. So I look at it a little bit differently. We have also adopted 79E, which is an economic development tool. It's one tool that we can use in our toolbox. We've had a number of properties utilize this. The Hilltop School is one. That's a fabulous example of an adaptive reuse project. We also have 8 Government Way, which is being revitalized, or has been revitalized, and the Prey building. So we have a number of buildings that have utilized this investment tool. We also have an opportunity zone in our downtown, and we have an economic revitalization zone. So there's many incentives that can be utilized right now.
Okay, so I'm not saying Somersworth isn't doing anything. I would love to say that I feel like Somersworth is doing a fantastic job. I love the sidewalks. I love the revitalization that's happening. So I do not want to take away from anything you guys are doing, because I think you're doing an incredible job.
Yes.
But so those resources are out there.
Yes, those resources are out there. We have also updated our regulations. The planning board looked at this, I think, back in 2019 to allow for a special downtown overlay district to allow less parking in certain areas to incentivize development. We adopted form-based codes as a strategy to be able to look at the building form and not the use as much, to make sure that we can attract more businesses. We're not looking at the specific business uses. We're looking at the outside of the building. And
Michelle, you might want to mention that Main Street is under engineering design for police streets.
oh, okay.
Sidewalks, streetscaping,
Main Street, yes.
sewer, drainage.
Yes.
Claire is in the process of perhaps being purchased by Chinburg.
Yeah, okay. So this is our city manager, Robert Belmore. We put the Main Street, it's a complete streets project on the 10-year plan. We were the #1 project in the region. I think it's a $9 million project. We were voted on as the #1 project in the region. So that is a complete streets project. We're looking at redoing the infrastructure of the street along with the utilities. We also are upgrading Constitutional Way as a complete streets project.
Because I don't think enough people know that.
Yeah. So,
I really think you should.
and that is in 90% design. So we're hoping to build that next year. And then, as the city manager said, we are working with developers on redeveloping existing sites within our downtown. That is why I'm so excited to be the planning director. It's a huge opportunity to see these older buildings get redeveloped in downtown redevelopment.
Great. Well, thank you, Mike, for the question. So one thing I would just add is, as you're thinking about the visioning piece, housing in downtowns supports the businesses down there, right? If you have people that are living there, they're also spending their money there. They're getting a cup of coffee before they go to work. They're staying at the restaurants late at night. They're doing the shopping so that you have people that are there working during the day, and you have people that are there living, spending money, playing during night, right? And so, like, that type of cycle is really healthy for a community, drives businesses, but a lot of it starts with bringing people downtown through housing, right? So as you're doing that visioning piece, one of the things that folks could think about is, could we go denser? Could we go higher? What could we do, right? There's no, again, one solution there, but that's a way to sort of say, okay, as we vision what we want to see and what could be zoned for, that's a way to support your businesses, support your housing, make a really healthy tax base and a really healthy community.
And I think that's a really important observation. I think you're both right, because you're saying that the myth is Somersworth isn't doing enough to fill those empty storefronts. The reality is Somersworth is doing a tremendous amount, but it's not filling the storefronts. So what has to happen to get the storefronts filled? Right. And that's the next stage in the conversation. And so the busting the myth saying Somersworth isn't doing enough, but then the question becomes, well, what would it take? And that is, I think, what's on the table for discussion. Do we know enough about what those property owners are, what their reasons for not selling, filling, renting? Sometimes it's a business decision. You take a hit over here and your taxes go down over here. So what are the incentives? What can the city do? There are...
I want to make sure we're getting to, sorry,
Yeah.
totally love for you guys to talk about this afterwards. I just want to make sure we're getting to other things on the, yeah. And then, another question. Sorry,
right.
I promise you're here.
Be here. They're here all night.
So we just moved here about 3 years ago. When I look at Chinburg's current apartment building, I don't know if it's Mill Building 1. I can't keep up with Great Falls's. I see them having an access to downtown issue. There's only it's just squeezed in. They can only drive into that parking lot. I think once they get in their car, they just go elsewhere. You can't even really cross the railroad track. It's those types of things. If we're going to get a 128-unit apartment building, the site that they're looking at, the other developer, they're going to have complete access. But the current Chinburg one that was renovated maybe 15 years ago, I don't know. It's just, walking around this town, I want to go and look at the falls. I want to go and walk along. We grew up in Manchester and we had that opportunity there.
So yeah, this is something that the city is looking at. We've actually met with New Hampshire North Coast to start discussions about pedestrian access to Aclara. This would have to be approved at the council level, but we're already starting to have those discussions if this site is going to be redeveloped. That is something that's going to have to happen. We have also put into the capital improvements plan design or study of a river walk, a feasibility, but that would be a private and a public partnership that we would have to work with a developer, which is complicated, to get access to the riverfront. So that is a few years out, but we've had those conversations and we're thinking about that.
Time for one more question, if the panel is okay with that. Is there another question? There you are. I thought I saw your hand earlier. Sorry about that.
So I also happen to be on the ZBA and see a lot of variances come before us. And I think that something that affects business is the fact that zoning takes all these little niche or different categories of business, but businesses now become niche categories that might blend those. So zoning needs to keep up with this. And the second part of business is they need traffic. People will have a storefront, but if they don't have traffic out there, they're going to do nothing with it. So I think we need traffic on Main Street to get those storefronts up and going. Used to be people would live upstairs and have a small business downstairs. Some of those buildings are already set up for that. But instead, we've got people who would rent it out, and then they'd want to put residential downstairs instead of business. So I think zoning becomes a lot. I guess this is more of a comment than more of a question, but it just seems like there's a lot of different aspects that play into all of this, and especially in the business realm, you've got to get business in there. You need foot traffic, street traffic, where the buildings are, and there's a lot of room in zoning in all aspects to be improved.
Yeah, well, first, thank you for service on the zoning board. The service on land use boards is so important to this conversation, and I serve on a zoning board. I know it can be late nights, but it's really important work, so thank you for doing that. I think that's a great comment. I think that's a great point, and I think, again, as we share sort of the feedback, I'd say just keep speaking about it, because you're exactly right, that bringing people downtown is really important for the economic revitalization and the housing and the density and the walking, and all of it plays together. And I think Somersworth is doing a great job, especially on the form-based code piece too. Like, that's an area where Somersworth is really, I think, sort of at the forefront of some best practices that allow for it to be, not so rigid, but clearly, people are coming before you, and that's something that, maybe it's certainly worth looking at to see. Okay, if there's something we keep seeing over and over again, and we keep making the same decision, we keep having grant and relief, maybe it's something we should just fix in the code.
Well, as Michelle mentioned when she kicked us off, this project is through a grant fund, and we are lucky enough to have this be first part of a two-part project to then look at auditing the zoning ordinance. So we would love your help, Richard, something like that. We could always use additional folks that are on the steering committee for this work as well, so maybe we might be tapping you for that. But it is definitely a second piece of this, because we can't do one without the other. It would be fruitless. So with that, we actually are jumping into our breakout sessions. As we promised, we're hoping this set the stage for you to have some conversations about where housing should be, about how we build more support, and part of that is around zoning, and how can we build support around making those zoning changes. And then for our younger and our older adults, how can we increase accessibility? How can we increase affordability and availability in general of housing, affordable housing for those folks? So we have 3 sessions. The first that I mentioned, that would be where the housing should be. It's a mapping exercise with Jen and our GIS director, wherever he is, there he is. And that will be in Mulligan's Grill. So if you want an interactive session with mapping and drawing and markers and all sorts of fun stuff, that will be in there. The second one is going to be here in the black box with our city staff right here, and they will be talking about how we can increase support. What are the things we need to do through campaigns, discussions, additional partners, et cetera. That will also be interactive. We'll be taking notes there. And then the third is going to be just down the hallway to the right. It's called the custodian's office. There is a sign on it. It doesn't say custodian's office. And that's going to be, sorry, Michelle's in here, right? And then, I apologize, backwards. Michelle will be in here. And our 2 lovely city planners with Michelle are going to be in accessibility, availability, and affordability for younger and older adults. So grab some more refreshments. If you are coming back in here, you can't bring those with you, but finish them in the Mulligan's Grill, and we'll start at 7:15-ish with those 3. So again, you'll see the signs on the door as well, but if you need it, first one is Mulligan's Grill with where housing should be. Second is Black Box right here with Michelle, and the third one is the custodian's office just around the corner. Bathrooms are down the hall the opposite way as you came in towards the CTC entrance if you do need that before you break into your new session. And this is going to be the last time we're going to speak. We're not coming back in here, so thank you all on behalf of the city for doing this and for being here. This is great. We have your addresses, and we will make the PowerPoint slides available. The address for the project is on the bottom of your agenda.